managing this resource going forward. So, Laura, I think maybe it's appropriate for you to
Sure.
give us a summary of the work that you did last summer. Yeah. So I should just introduce this in saying that several years ago, a proposal was written to DEC, I suppose, for a tree inventory, and that was funded, and the money came.
And the caveat was New York State DEC, Environmental Conservation, and John represents the state today. You're at the Stony Brook office, correct? And the funding came from an urban and community forestry program with appropriations through New York State Environmental Protection Fund, is what I'm talking about. So, thanks everybody who did follow through on doing that. I'm Laura Schwanoff. I'm actually not the entire field crew that was on this project. We had a couple of different people working on the project with me. Steve Nizek, you see his name is there, was supposed to be here tonight, but he's up in Michigan, stuck in an airport. So, unfortunately, I would have liked to have him here also, because he was the one out there as a tree hugger, doing a lot of the work, along with Kristen Konak. But I'll move ahead. It worked. Okay, great. So the tree inventory was started at, when the trees were in leaf this past spring, and it went through until about October, November, and then recently we had, part of it is a fault on mine, but there were some dropouts in some of the data. Give you a little background, the equipment that we used was a tablet, and we loaded up the iTree software on that tablet. And iTree is pretty cool because it creates Excel tables. So whenever you want to go back and look at the data, you can sort through that data and find out particulars. We were talking earlier about which trees would need replacement or which trees are a problem. You can sort through that menu and pull up all the trees that are so listed. In any case, just to start, we were tasked with doing a tree inventory, and the first thing is, what do you consider a tree? How big is a tree? We had a meeting with the planning board, and the decision was made, we'd go with 6 inches and greater diameter at breast height, which means about 3.5 feet off the ground. We'd get the measurement of that tree diameter. And we also picked up all park trees that were planted, horticultural species that were 3 inches and larger, because those are types you would typically, bring in and replace trees in a park. And from the get-go, we decided with the planning board to break up the whole study area into 4 management units. Bayview Park, Washington Street. I'm going to get to a slide that gives you an idea of what that is, but Bayview Park, Washington Street, Tinker Bluff, and Van Brunt Manor Road. And the think work behind that is that the development pattern in the village is quite different in each one of these management areas. Much more dense over here in this Bayview Park section. This center section, Tinker Bluff, is a lot newer, so you'll have a different type of vegetative canopy in here. The Van Brunt section, much older, and you'll see even by the data that it shows up. You've got a lot of very big, old, mature trees in there. And then this other section here, Washington. So that's how we chose to split up the data to make it more manageable for the village. It had a lot to do with the development patterns, as well as whether or not there were overhead lines that you had to deal with. So what did we pick up on the inventory? Basically, we got the longitude for every longitude, latitude location for every tree that was picked up. Identified the tree down to species where we could. In some cases, the iTree has a drop-down menu that the Forest Service actually put together, And some things don't get distinguished on iTree. For instance, I think hickories, some of the hickories are not distinguished. They just say hickory instead of a-nut or mock-a-nut. Tree diameter, just mentioned, we would measure that when we're out in the field. And in setting up the iTree parameters, iTree also had a range of values that it would present. So it would say 0 to 6 inch, 6 inch to 12 inch, 12 to 18. It had a range. So when we would pick up those tree diameters, it would be listed in that series of incremental ranges. And on each tree, we did a ranking of relative health. I'll show you that in the next slide. Recorded any issues with overhead wires or we were just talking before everybody came in about some trees that were starting to lean over the road or causing problems in leaning into wires. And we also noted management concerns on a number of the trees. So this basically is the tree health criteria that we were using. We've used it many times in other tree surveys. It's a relative ranking that we go with. On the far left, you can see something that's pretty poor to dead, okay? It's pretty obvious when you see a tree like that, and it's standing. It could be a snag tree. It might be great for wildlife, but if that kind of tree was in an area starting to lean over a road, we might consider that a real hazard tree and consider maybe you need to take that down. On the right-hand side, get more of a specimen. So that's like a nice big white pine that's very happy where it's growing and doesn't conflict with any overhead lines. So that tree health rating criteria kind of gives you a definition of each of the different types of ratings that we apply for each of the trees. Any questions on this so far, on how we rated them? Okay.
I have a question. So there are some recent diseases that are starting to spread on Long Island, and were you able to detect those in our trees or not, or it just wasn't easy enough to do that from standing and looking up at them?
Yes and no.
Okay.
iTree does have a capability that there's one of the last menus that you can go through. You can actually target if you're looking for a certain type of pest. So, for instance, emerald ash borer or the Asian longhorn beetle are two things that I know DEC is very interested in, and also the pine. There's a pine disease. We did not, in this case, we didn't find anything like that. Did we look for it? Sure. If we saw something while we were doing our measurements, we would note it, and typically would have notes in the notes section of the iTree. But we didn't come across anything that was apparent to us.
So I'll just also add that there's often a lot of discussion on what tree is a village tree, what tree is on a property. And so in this case, when the survey was done, I think we went 25 feet off the pavement on both sides. And so that covers all of the trees. Some aren't village, some are, and so on. But at least it was the way to investigate all of the trees and to see the...
Yeah, we wanted to be more inclusive rather than less.
Right.
So we took Roger's suggestion and actually applied our maps, took all the property boundaries and put it as an overlay to our GIS base map so we could be sure we were still covering everything that we needed to. So, I'm sure you can't read it, but that's an example of how the iTree data comes out. It's a huge spreadsheet. And as I said, it's an Excel sheet that you can sort by categories. So that information has been passed on to the village, and it's something that we can sort through, we can share with you. There's one other piece of information. I'll get to the next. Well, before I move, the tree on the left is one of the most one of the more common trees that you have in this village. beautiful chestnut oaks all over the place. And it was nice to see such a great stand of those here in this village. I hadn't come across so many of them like that, except for when I've done some surveys further east, out in like Shoreham and areas like that. So it was very nice to see. The results of our, well, you can't really focus on it, can you? It looks a little pixelated. In any case,
The houses.
yeah. In any case, this map shows you the results of the survey. In total, there was about 1,700 trees that were picked up. And you can see the broad areas that were the different management units that we were looking at. Also on this graphic, and we could probably provide you with a much larger, we were talking about that. It would be nice to see it in color and you could read it a lot easier. But all the trees and their rankings are listed on there. They're located in the color dots correspond to excellent, good, fair, poor, dead or dying. One very notable thing that I enjoyed, because I was going out doing more quality control on the field work, is that you have a lot of very large, beautiful historic trees in this village that are very much worthy of protection and preservation. I think we came up with just about 20 of them. So those, right off the bat, one of our recommendations would be to take a look at those trees. Have an arborist get out there, assess the health of those, try to do the best you can to preserve them as much as you can, because those trees also become the seed trees for other ones that will be growing around it. This is just a summary of your major species that were identified. Notably, it's mostly oaks that were found in the village. Northern red oak, chestnut oak. I know there was scarlet oak. There might have been some confusion on some scarlet and northern red, but they're all in the same red oak group. White oak. So red maple came up as the most common tree that showed up. That's in the upper left. Northern red oak, the second most dominant. Chestnut oak, as I said, gorgeous stand of chestnut oak in this village. White oak. The unfortunate thing is, above some of the other oaks, like the white oak and the black oak, we had a couple of invasive species showing up on the list. That actually happens quite often when you're doing street tree inventories. A lot of times trees will pioneer in and they weren't planted. You know, they could be trees that weren't planted, or they could have been planted. Norway maples were planted quite a bit a number of years back. But they do tend to self-propagate, and you get more than initially intended. Black locust is another tree that is an escapee that is also showing up quite high in your ranking of trees. Sassafras is a native, and white oak is a native. And then there's a whole series of other trees that were identified during the inventory.
I think we had like 100 species or something.
Yeah, I mean, I could pull that out and share that. Hang on, I'll see if we have it.
But as someone who doesn't know trees that well, it sounded like a much richer variety than I.
Yeah, there was quite a blend. It was a very interesting survey to conduct. The other, I think what stands out to me too is, and I'm sure you'll speak to it too, John, is the native species are just beautiful to see how well they're doing in your community. It's the invasives that if we can have a few less of those, that would be great. Okay, some of the results that we came up with, one of the primary things we focused on were hazard trees that needed to get some immediate attention, either limbing up or raising the crown or doing something so that you don't conflict with power lines. There's also, as I said before, if there were hazard trees that looked like they might have had some signs of disease or decay in the center, so heart rot, those would be considered hazard trees, and we recommended that they be taken down. Again, taking any tree down is an assessment that somebody who knows the health of trees should be helping to make that assessment. An arborist would be best to do that. Some trees can stay and be pruned, and that's enough work, to keep that tree maintained. Others might need to be fully removed and then replaced by natives. So what we had come up with is about 176 trees recommended for removal. In total, that's about 10% of the village trees. And this table just gives you an idea of where those trees are located. It's pretty easy to see. Washington Street is a very small place that, in the whole study area. And then Tinker Bluff, it says 4%, 7% of the quadrant. Tinker Bluff had a lot of new material in there, and then it had a lot of old material that needed to be weeded out. So we were trying to give you some kind of handle on what needed the most attention. I can't really say Van Brunt Manor Road just jumps out at us. That seemed to be the oldest stand of trees along that road, and I'll get into it in another slide. While it has 18% that are recommended for removal, some of it is for competition. So you have too many trees grown in close proximity. Your largest specimen trees would do better if you could selectively remove some of the understory or the competing trees. And then also you have some of your largest, most scenic trees within Van Brunt. So it has to be very selective when you're going to go in and do some management. Wire conflicts turned out to be one of the biggest issues we found in the village. Some of it, there are trees volunteered or came in under wires. In other cases, wires are up and trees become mature and they just conflict with, overhead wires. So our recommendations in iTree talk to that. One of the biggest things that we saw that would be helpful for the village in doing any kind of tree management or tree care, there's a lot of invasive vines that have grown up around the trunks of trees. So Boston ivy, well, poison ivy is everywhere, but there's a lot of different things that have been planted, and to improve the health of your mature trees, it would be great to keep that area around the base of the tree without those kind of ground covers going up and strangulating the tree. Release from competition is another thing that we would note when we were doing the survey. And then one of the last things we tried to do is give the village some ideas of what kind of tree replacements could be considered. In most cases, the tree replacements that we were recommending are native replacements for natives that had disappeared. We did not get into horticultural specimens. Park trees are a completely different animal. I'm a landscape architect, so I know which park trees might work, but our emphasis on this was to say, let's promote the health of the native tree community, and anything that would come in satisfying the chestnut oak community would be a great replacement type tree. Just some other things we noticed while we were out doing our survey. There's some best management practices that the village can do. You've got some glorious trees and some beautiful parks, and it would be great to just become more aware of different management practices that can be done to just lengthen the longevity of the trees that you have. In this case, we had witnessed some earth-moving equipment. Quite honestly, on the left-hand side, you see the tire tracks in the mud. You see the other track in the grass. Bringing any kind of heavy equipment that close to a tree underneath the canopy can cause damages to the roots, but it can also cause damages to overhanging branches. So, doing some proper trimming or before any construction equipment is moved, going out, marking trees or identifying which limbs to take off carefully by pruning rather than having the equipment run through it and knock it off. It's gonna be a lot better for, saving that tree. We did trees that were down, some of them were, experienced some heart rot, so they looked like they were